They tell you in basic training that the silence is your friend. It means the enemy isn't moving. It means you're winning. But they never tell you what happens when the silence starts to feel like it's breathing. My name is Sergeant Miller. I spent 12 years in the Corps, most of it in places you only see on the news when things go wrong. I thought I knew what dark looked like. I thought I knew what isolation felt like. But I didn't know a damn thing until I was assigned to Outpost 4 Alpha. It's not on any map. You won't find it in any public record. It's a concrete plug buried deep in the Antarctic ice, 300 miles from anything with a heartbeat. When the transport dropped me off, the pilot didn't even shut down the engines. He just pushed my gear out onto the snow, looked me in the eye for a second too long, and took off. I stood there in the middle of a white void, watching the lights of the C-130 vanish into the clouds, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own breath and the pulsing red glow of the airlock door. I wasn't alone long. The heavy steel door groaned open, and a man in a weathered parka stepped out. He didn't offer a welcome to the base. He didn't even ask for my orders. He handed me a small plastic-sleeved card. It was covered in grease stains and fingerprint smudges. "Memorize it," he said. His voice sounded like gravel being ground together. "And don't ever, under any circumstances, lose it, because if you forget the rules out here, the ice doesn't just kill you, it keeps you." I looked down at the card. It wasn't my duty roster. At the top, in bold black letters, it simply said, SOP for Outpost 4 Alpha, Survival Protocols. Rule number 1, if you see a silhouette standing exactly 50 yards from the perimeter fence, do not shine your tactical light on it. It isn't a person, and if you acknowledge it, it will think you've invited it inside. I remember looking out into that endless, freezing dark and realizing for the first time the government wasn't paying us to guard the base. They were paying us to make sure whatever was outside didn't realize we were in here. I sat in the mess hall that first night, the hum of the internal generators vibrating through the soles of my boots. It was a low industrial thrum that never stopped, a sound meant to remind you that as long as the machines were running, you were still breathing. Across from me sat Miller, a guy who looked like he'd been stationed on the ice since the Cold War. He didn't eat, he just stared at the steam rising from his coffee, his eyes tracking something invisible in the corner of the room. I pulled the laminated card from my pocket, the plastic crinkling in the silence. I wanted to ask him about rule number 2. The red emergency light over the main airlock must never be extinguished. If it flickers, do not attempt to restore power. Report to the armory and wait for the sun. "Hey, Miller," I started, my voice sounding too loud in the cramped space. "What's with the light? It's just an LED. Why the armory?" Miller didn't look up. He just gripped his mug until his knuckles turned as white as the snow outside. "The light isn't for us to see, kid. The light is a boundary. It tells whatever's out there that the door is occupied. If that light goes out, the door becomes neutral ground." I wanted to laugh it off, to chalk it up to base fever or some elaborate military hazing ritual. But then the overhead fluorescent buzzed, dimmed, and died. The only thing left was the faint, pulsing red glow coming from the corridor leading to the airlock. And then it happened. The red glow didn't just dim, it flickered once, twice, and then the base plunged into a darkness so thick it felt like physical weight pressing against my chest. "Armory, now," Miller hissed. We scrambled down the narrow hallway, our boots clanging against the metal plate floors. As we passed the airlock, I made the mistake of looking through the reinforced observation port. The red light was dead, but the snow outside wasn't dark. It was shimmering with a faint bioluminescent gray, and standing right against the glass, so close I could see the frost on its non-existent features, was a figure. It wasn't a soldier, it wasn't a man, it was just a shape, draped in rags that moved even though there was no wind inside the airlock. It held a hand up to the glass. It didn't have fingers, just long, tapered needles of ice. I froze, breaking rule number 3. Never maintain eye contact with a perimeter entity. The thing didn't move. It just began to tap. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythmic, patient sound that echoed through the steel hull of the base, vibrating directly into my teeth. Miller grabbed my harness and yanked me toward the armory, slamming the heavy door shut behind us. We sat there for 4 hours in the pitch black, listening to that tapping move from the door to the walls, and finally, to the ceiling directly above our heads. The silence in that armory wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air right before a massive electrical storm. Miller and I sat back to back on the cold floor, our rifles resting across our knees, though we both knew lead probably wouldn't do much against whatever was pacing on the roof. Then, the base's intercom crackled. It was a burst of static so loud it made my teeth ache, followed by a voice that stopped my heart. "Silas? Miller? The door is stuck. I can't get the heating unit to reset. It's so cold out here. Please, just crack the inner seal." It was Henderson. He was supposed to be in the communications hub 3 levels down. There was no way he could be outside the airlock. But the voice, it was identical. Every inflection, every desperate tremor of a man who was freezing to death. I reached for the radio on my shoulder, my thumb hovering over the push-to-talk button. Miller's hand clamped down on my wrist like a vice. He didn't say a word. He just pointed to the laminated card in my lap. Rule number 6. The entities will use the voices of those you trust to lure you into the transition zones. If a teammate calls for help from behind a sealed door, do not respond, even if they recite their correct authentication code. Especially if they recite it correctly. "Silas, I know you're in there," the voice pleaded through the speakers. "I have the codes. 7 Delta 9 or 4. Please, my fingers. I can't feel my fingers anymore." The tapping on the ceiling stopped. The base went deathly still. And then we heard it from the other side of the heavy armory door. A soft, wet, scratching sound. Like someone was dragging a bag of raw meat across the concrete. "Open the door, Silas," the voice whispered. But it wasn't coming from the intercom anymore. It was coming from right behind the steel plating of the room we were sitting in. Miller leaned in close to my ear, his breath smelling of stale coffee. "That's not Henderson," he breathed. "Henderson died 3 years ago at Station 9. They just haven't figured out he's gone yet." I felt a cold sweat break out under my thermal layers. If Henderson was dead, who had I been eating lunch with for the last 2 weeks? The red emergency light over the door gave one final violent flicker and then stayed solid. The humming of the generators returned to its normal pitch. The scratching stopped. The weight in the air lifted just as quickly as it had arrived. When we finally opened the armory door at sunrise, the hallway was empty. But there, right in the center of the floor, was a single, perfect handprint made of frost. It had 6 fingers. I didn't stay at Station 12 for the rest of my tour. I requested a transfer to a desk job in DC the very next day. They didn't even ask why. They just looked at my logs, looked at the handprint on the floor, and signed the papers. I still have that laminated card. I keep it taped to the inside of my front door at home. People think it's a joke. They think I'm just an eccentric veteran with too many stories. But every night at 2:14 a.m., when I hear that faint tap, tap, tap on my bedroom window, I don't look out. I just close my eyes, recite my service number, and wait for the sun